Stardate 2385.9. Alright, so it's been a little while since the last audio journal, and in that one I was on my way to Timberline Lodge, so I'll just pick it up there. So Timberline Lodge is about halfway up Mount Hood, which is a volcano and part of the Cascades. So if I didn't explain already, the Cascades is a mountain range that starts in Northern California with Mount Shasta. I believe this is true. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And continues north, and there's a bunch of other volcanoes. They all kind of look the same. One of them was Mount Jefferson, and then Mount Hood was, where Timberline Lodge was, which I'll talk about in a minute. And after that, there was Mount Adams, as you get into Washington. And then I think there's a McKinley. There was another one. And then off to the left, you could see Mount St. Helens, which was actually, the top was blown off because it erupted in the 80s. And it kind of looked like a scorched, burned, just volcano. Kind of dangerous looking. And Crater Lake itself used to be a volcano called Mazama. So those are all volcanoes that are part of the Cascade Range. And I'm in Washington now. I'm still headed north, so I'm expecting to come across more of these volcanoes. But yeah, so where we left it off last time, I was walking up Mount Hood, the side of volcano Mount Hood, to Timberline Lodge. And it was really, beautiful track up there. There was a 50-mile marathon going on, or ultra marathon. And so these athletes are, so crazily in shape. And that section was really flat, so it was kind of a big deal event. And they were sharing the trail with the thru hikers. So I saw the first guy go by, and then got to like a way station where they have food for these guys because they're running so long, and talked about what ultra marathon running was for a little while with them. And it's really impressive. When I was younger, I sort of considered the marathon distance to be like the longest distance you would ever want to run. A reasonable person would ever want to run 26 miles, 26 something. And so for these people to be running like 50 miles is so crazy. And the guy was doing like a 7-minute mile or something. He'd run 35 miles in about 3.5 hours, they were saying, which is just totally insane to me. But as I walked down the path a little bit further, I met someone whose husband was in the race, but she was just kind of like running around in the trails just to kind of kill the time. And she was telling me about a 100-mile race that she did out west, and it took 28 hours, so nonstop. So she was just running. She ran 100 miles in 28 hours, and that's just crazy. So, anyways, it was cool to meet a bunch of those people. That was a bit of excitement, and then I ended up at Timberline Lodge, which it's a little surreal. There's still people snowboarding and skiing up there. So I sort of walked through this sandy desert, almost like quicksand, on the side of Mount Hood to get up there, and it was so hot, like, close to 100 degrees, with the sort of like the heat shimmering mirage style. And I got up into the parking lot on Timberline Lodge, and out walks, in front of me, some guy in snow pants and like a winter jacket and his snowboard and goggles to get on a bus, I guess, that was going to take them up the side of Mount Hood. And someone told me later, like, yeah, they groom the snow like almost all summer, so they have like nice fluffy snow up there to snowboard on. It still seems like it would be pretty hot for all that gear, but it is what it is. And Timberline Lodge is a beautiful place, sort of old wooden structure, but very, very well built. Looks like it was probably, there was a lot of money that went into it originally. And I met Rainfly there, who had seen a couple times. I think I first met him in Sead Valley, and he was the first thru hiker I'd seen in a while. And Bear, who I'd met for the first time there. Bear is kind of like this 29-year-old, very large dude who was moving pretty quick. Really nice, both of them, and sat down and had a long brunch with them. And I'd also hit like a pizza joint up earlier called Blue Ox in the Timberline Lodge. Got my resupply box there also at the gift store. They hold packages for hikers. That was cool. And headed out. So I didn't actually stay there. I just was there for maybe 4 hours recharging my phone and getting my box and moving on. And found a place to camp down by a river. It was pretty crowded, but I snuck in and yeah, kept going. So I think the next couple days were a little bit harder than they had been in Oregon so far, but I made it to Cascade Locks, which was the last stop in Oregon before going into Washington. And it's a funny little town. It's like a little short strip, super hot. Again, it's just been really hot up here. And I decided I needed to get a hotel because I was pretty tired. I'd been pushing. I was pushing pretty hard since Ashland to try to finish by August 15th. And actually, I got it into my head that maybe I could squeeze that date a little bit earlier, like maybe all the way down to August 8th. So I was trying to get 25 to 30 miles a day and wearing myself out a bit and going through resupply spots without stopping. You know, just stopping just long enough to recharge my phone and external battery and eat maybe one or two meals and then just take off. So that was sort of the plan with Cascade Locks too. Got in there midday, resupplied at the post office, saw my bounce bucket for the last time, and sent it home. Actually, I sent it back to Portsmouth because there's nowhere convenient, no post office that's convenient in Washington. And I saw a bear there down at the RV park by the water. Beautiful, like, park right on the river. And there's a nice brew pub there. So I had just a nice, relaxing afternoon and took off in the morning after, doing some post office errands. So at Cascade Locks, there's this bridge called Bridge of the Gods, and it's pretty epic. I think maybe it opens like it's a drawbridge. I'm not really sure. But it's the place in the movie Wild where the character Cheryl Strayed, whatever her name is, it's where she ends her hike. So she's decided, she's hiked 2,000 miles. She doesn't need to hike anymore, and she kind of looks at the bridge, and that's the end of the movie. But of course, it's not the end of the trail. The trail continues on for another 500 or 600 miles. And the bridge looked nothing like it did in the movie, which was interesting. So it's freaky. It's a really freaky bridge to walk over. There's no sidewalk for people to walk. It's just a car bridge, and there's a lot of traffic on it. And it's a long bridge, and it's really windy, and it's a grate, like a metal grate bridge. So when you look down, you're just looking down maybe 100, 120 feet at the river, which is moving very quickly below. And the whole bridge is sort of swaying a little bit. So you kind of inch along the left side of the bridge. There's a toll person there, and she's like, yeah, go. Just stay to the left side. Okay. You kind of inch along the left side of the bridge, try not to get hit by cars. And this really is the PCT. Like, there's a big PCT badge or sort of like symbol on the top of the bridge when you enter it. but also very exhilarating, and a really nice way to mark your entry into the last state, Washington. So ultimately I made it across, but wasn't expecting that to be so harrowing. And yeah, and then struck off into the woods, and right away Washington was totally different. These huge ferns everywhere. It almost looked like a scene from Avatar where the plants are all, 4 times as large as they should be. And I think that's probably from all the water in the river getting dumped in there as rain. But I started to worry about rain. I haven't actually had a day of rain on the entire trip so far since April 3rd. So that's like almost 4 months without rain. April, May, June, July. Yeah, almost 4 months without a single day of rain, which is crazy. So I got in there and hiked for a while. My memory's a little bit blurry. I think I went to, what was the next spot? I feel like there's a resupply spot in there somewhere. It wasn't all the way to White Pass, was it? No, must not have been. There must have been another resupply spot. Well, I'll just say that Washington was, for the most part, less bugs. But some bugs, so still having to deal with mosquitoes, but it's not too bad. And some really, really gorgeous spots. So in there somewhere that we went to this place called Goat Rocks, and it was just spectacular. Maybe the most amazing sort of thing I've seen and hiked through on the trail so far. And at the end of Goat Rocks, it's just these huge sweeping vistas, and everything's green, and there's wildflowers everywhere, and there's tons of snow melt coming off the mountain, waterfalls everywhere, and volcanoes in 3 directions. You've got McKinley, Adams, and Mount St. Helen in your north-south and to the west. Yeah, just unbelievable. And at the end of it, this section called the Knife's Edge, which is just a ridge that literally runs along the top of maybe 5 or 6 mountains, like a roller coaster. And you pass a few snow fields. So I was on snow for a little while, but it wasn't too bad. Yeah, so that was really spectacular. And I resupplied there. Oh, I remember where that first resupply spot was. So I'm going to go back just a second. So after I got into Washington, I think it was about 3 days to this town called Trout Lake. And Trout Lake is at the base of Mount Adams, which is one of the volcanoes. Nice little town. Not much to say about it. It was supposed to be a hard hitch to get in there, but it turned out to be really easy to get a ride in and get a ride back. And again, I just went in for about 4 hours to recharge my electronics and get fed. And I had a huckleberry milkshake because huckleberries are a thing in the area. I guess it's the only place in the world or something where huckleberries can grow, and they don't grow being farmed. And there's all these regulations about who can pick them. And I think there's a Native American ceremony that was happening as I was going through that sort of marked the first day of the picking season. So there was all these teepees set up on the way to Trout Lake. And in Trout Lake, I ran into Summer, who was a hiker that I'd hiked with for a little while in Oregon, in southern Oregon, and her foot seemed okay. At one point, it sounded like there was a nurse who I ran into who was like, "Oh, yeah, do you know Summer? She broke her foot." That was when we were at Shelter Cove. And she's off trail and her hike is over and all this stuff. And when I met Summer, she was like, "No, the nurse was just totally overreacting." And okay, I've got some hikers coming by, so I'm gonna pause this momentarily. Let's see. Pause. All right, that was cool. The hiker who just passed was Bear. I thought he was way ahead, but apparently he stayed at Cascade Locks for 0, and then did another 0 at White Pass. So, yeah, awesome. Trying to remember where I left off. I did talk about Trout Lake. Oh, one interesting thing about Trout Lake was when I left, I stayed about 7 or 8 miles out at the base of Mount Adams, and it was gorgeous walking in there because there was a burn maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, and it's recovered really nicely. So they had all these sort of like charred, blackened, curved, like, trees. They look kind of like canes, but very lush greenery all around and wildflowers everywhere. So it was sort of like had that phoenix rising from the ashes feeling. But also because of the hooked trees, they look kind of like weird candy canes. So it reminded me of almost like a weird summer version of Santa's Workshop or Santa's Kingdom from those old movies, like The Night They Saved Christmas. Okay, that's dodgy. Okay, so and I stayed at the base of that mountain, Mount Adams, and it got into the 20s that night. So it actually froze, and it had a lot of condensation earlier in the night. So my sleeping bag got really damp, and my tent got damp, and then all of that moisture froze. So I was like in an ice sleeping bag. And when I woke up in the morning, it was so confusing because during the day, it's almost 100 degrees. So that's a almost 80 degree swing, which is insane. So let's see, what else? Right, so from Adams, I kept going, and I talked about Knife's Edge, which was beautiful, and got to White Pass. And White Pass is you just go on, across the highway, and there's a convenience store there, and that's it. And they take hiker they accept hiker boxes. So I'd sent myself a pair of new shoes, and I swapped out my shoes, and I resupplied at the store. They had just enough variety to kind of get me through the next week or so, and hung out with a bunch of southbound hikers. And that's something I haven't talked about yet. There's a ton of what we call sobos out here. I'm a nobo because I'm northbound through hikers. So I started meeting sobos, southbound through hikers, as soon as I crossed the border into Washington. And the first ones looked, like super serious, and they had tiny little backpacks and gigantic leg muscles, and looked like they were, they knew what they were doing. And they actually have a much harder task than we do going north because their window of opportunity is very small. I think they only have 3.5, maybe 4 months to make it down south before the Sierras start filling up with snow. And of course they also have the added challenge this year of just a ton of fires. So the people doing this are like pretty hardcore. Whoop. Or at least the ones in front. And so when I got to White Pass, I was just in a bubble of them, about 20 of them in there. Oh, and I kept passing them. So it's kind of a funny effect. It's like I'm totally alone out here in one sense because there's no nobos left except like 1 or 2. But there's tons of sobos, and the further north that you walk, the greener they get. Like the cleaner their backpacks look, and the less in shape they get, and the more they seem like they don't know what they're doing or are, suffering sort of the initial pains of getting their hiking legs. So I hung out with some of those people in White Pass a bit and got some information about what I'll be facing in the northern part of Washington, which is apparently, one, very beautiful, but also, quote, rugged. And yeah, I was just wanting to figure out if that was going to slow me down a lot. People keep telling me that it's, there's a lot of amazing mountains up there, and that my jaw will drop, and that it's the best part of the trail and all that kind of stuff, which is cool, but it also worries me slightly. It's very remote, and if the weather's bad, I think there's a lot of exposure. So you could get caught, like way up in the mountains in a bad thunderstorm, and that'd be a bummer. So I spent a little while researching how to get out of there if things went wrong, exit routes. But it looks like the weather is supposed to be good for the next 2 weeks, which is how long I'm predicting it'll take me to finish. About 14 days. And yeah, it's supposed to get a little cooler too, which will be nice because it's been up in the 90s towards 100. Alright, so White Pass. And then I headed out from White Pass and stayed at a lake that night called Snow Lake that had a fair bit of mosquitoes, but that was the last spot the mosquitoes were bad. And since then it's been like bliss. It's like I keep stopping and thinking to myself, like, why am I in such a good mood? why can I just like stand still and things are okay, and I can just lie down on the trail and take a nap and not worry about anything, and it's just the bugs are not an issue. So I'm so happy about that. It was almost a month solid of mosquitoes every day. Another thing that's been really cool about Washington is the critters. So when I first got in, there was this little critter kind of running all over the rocks. And the best way to describe him is he's kind of like a mix of a rabbit, a chipmunk, and a rat. And when they stop and kind of like, chew whatever they're eating, they look like a chipmunk sitting up, but the way they nibble is very much like a rabbit. But they have kind of like a rat tail, but they're bigger than rats. Anyway, they're the cutest things I've ever seen. They were like all over the place. The other slightly larger critter that I've been running into a lot is, so for the first one I saw, I was walking by a lake, more like a small pond, and off to my right, I just heard this crashing sound, and it really startled me. So I took my headphones out, calmed down, looked over to see what it was, and I was trying to figure out what kind of animal it was, and my initial feeling was like, oh my god, there's a moose, and it's really close to me. It's only like 50 feet away from me, and it's huge, and moose are dangerous, which I know from hiking in Maine. And it had like a big snout. Oh, we got some more hikers coming up here, and it was trying to run away from me, which was very comforting. Hold on one sec. I'll let these guys pass. Hello. How are you?
Good.
Oh, you guys go. You're 3.
We got about 5 or 6 days. I'm going 5. They're going 7.
Oh, I mean, like, you guys. There's more of you, so it's easier for me to.
A bunch of us.
Yeah.
More back there.
Okay.
Yeah.
You too. Hello.
How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Incredible.
Great.
Have a good trip.
Thanks. Alright, so long story short, it was not a moose, even though it was very large, and moose, like, it was an elk. But, hello. Good. You're good.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks. Or I think it was an elk. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a moose. Like, there aren't supposed to be moose up here, right? Maybe someone can tell me, because I don't have service. That's another thing. I basically never have service in Washington. So that was exciting and kind of funny, because it couldn't get out of the pond. It was like crashing and trying to run away as fast as it could, but it was pretty deep. It was like up to its chest easily, and it took a good like 10 seconds to just crash its way out of the pond and then bound off into the woods. And I almost got my camera out in time. But I I would have many more opportunities because they're everywhere. And one night, I think it was actually that night, is that night or the night after, the place I was staying at, Snow Lake, I heard like some large animal drinking water fairly close to where I had pitched my tent. So I snuck down there with my camera, and I got this video of about 6 or 7 elk drinking and then seeing me and booking it. So they're really scared of hikers, and you only have a second or so before they run away. They're sort of like, I think there's these birds called grouse, or maybe they're just big pheasants, and they'll scare the daylights out of you because they'll just be walking along and suddenly they'll make this like squeak noise, and they'll start pounding their wings because they're heavy to get off the ground. And while they're doing that, they're like crashing their wings into the leaves of all the low bushes, and they finally get going. But man, it's scary. So this is kind of like the large animal. Hello. Morning. Hey, dog. This is the large animal equivalent of the pheasants. And they won't see you or hear you until you're really close to them sometimes, like maybe 10 feet away. And then there's just like this explosion of surprise in the woods, like, you know, fairly close to you, and plants flying everywhere and dirt thrown up. And then this huge animal just like charging off through the woods away from you. And there are also a lot of them. So the morning after I stayed at Snow Lake, I was starting to get almost worried because I think I walked like right into the middle of like a herd of them. So there was this little field down below where there was probably about 30 or 40 of them, and I was walking by, they scattered, and from that distance they almost look like birds. There's so many of them. So the elk have been really cool. Okay, so all that stuff, and man, you hear that? That's a highway. Wow, roar of highway sound. Okay, so I hiked for a few more days after White Pass, and I mentioned earlier that I'm trying to finish as fast as I can now. So I had a lot of energy after White Pass because I had a bunch of pie, and I did 2 large days in a row, which I regretted later. I did 2 30-mile days, and I woke up the morning after I did the second 30-mile day just exhausted. Like, I was like, didn't think I could finish my hike at all. So I've been sort of counseling myself and saying like, all right, like you're pretty close to the end of this trail. You're only 300 miles or 270 miles away now, 2 weeks, and the impulse is, to try to finish as fast as possible, but you could totally blow it if you don't keep going at a steady pace, Steady Eddie. I have to not hurt myself. I have to not wear myself out, especially with these more remote, more rugged sections coming up. So yesterday I took a nice short 20-mile day, and it took me all day to do it, so I was going nice and slow. The 2 30-mile days, it was 2 days in a row where I was on my feet for 16 hours each day, which is, too much. It's not necessary that I do that. So I am getting into a place called Snoqualmie. It's like a ski resort that leaves its restaurant open in the summer, I guess. Maybe they have like other things you can do there. And that'll be really good. So I'm going to stay there for 4 or 5 hours and kind of do my thing and try to get in another 15-mile day today. So keep my mileage up. So that's kind of how things have been. I've been all alone, getting kind of lonely with no other nobos to hike with, getting super excited about the end of my trip, but also discouraged sometimes because when I overdo it, my energy just totally fails, and I can't figure out why. I eat lots of food, but it doesn't help, and it's like, no, dude, you're actually just exhausted. You just hiked 60 miles in 2 days, and you need to just lie down on the trail for a little while. Okay, so last two things I want to talk about is update on the fire situation, and you guys might actually know more about it than I do watching the news because it's national news. I'm seeing it on my AP feed sometimes, how bad these fires are, and one of them is down in Yosemite. I guess the smoke was just pouring into the valley in Yosemite and the Sierras, and they evacuated everyone from the park, and it's right at the height of tourist season, so they're going to lose a ton of money, and a lot of people were really, really disappointed. You know, this is their vacation that they've been planning all year, and there's only one really good time to be in there, you know, when the snow's not there and the temperature's right, and all the stars align, so that's a bummer. And a bunch of hikers obviously got caught in that too, people who started late. So that's one fire, and that's going to potentially affect me because it's in the section that I have to do when I'm done with Washington. So when I go back there, potentially go back there in September, end of August, that's the section I'm hoping to hike. So it'll be interesting to see if it's still closed then or if it's just not an issue. Also, there's another fire that started in Northern California, just west of Costella, in a town called Redding. And that's the one that's been in the news the past week or two. Or a week, I guess. It's only a week old. Now, I was in there to resupply twice. That's the town that I dropped the van off in when I took a bunch of people up to Costella from Bishop. And, yeah, if you hadn't seen on the news, like a huge, fast-moving fire swept right into the city of Redding, and they evacuated 70,000 people. I think there was, like, a few people who were killed. One was a firefighter. And yeah, it sounded terrifying. It sounded like a really fast-moving fire. One guy said that the flames on the hills looked like sun flares. Hello.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, man.
Are you Sobo?
Yeah.
Nice. Well, good.
Back on trail.
Yeah, right.
Just had a good little break in Snoqualmie.
Cool, yeah, that's where I'm going, so I'm hoping to get a corn dog, I guess, is the thing to get.
Go to the Aardvark food truck right outside the Chevron.
Aardvark food truck.
Get a free beer.
Yeah.
The food is really nice.
All right, fantastic. Trying to think of a tip for you, but not in the. There's nothing. It's all obvious in the stuff coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it pretty next section?
It's mostly just in the woods in the shade. There's there's a little bit of a burn you'll deal with, like a 6-mile burn in a few days. It's not bad. There's way worse stuff than that.
Right.
Far to the south.
Right. Yeah, I heard.
And then the only tip I have is try to set yourself up so you camp at the base of Knife's Edge.
Knife's Edge.
Before you go over. Yeah, that's right after White Pass.
Right after White Pass.
Yeah, so when you get after White's Pass, get to the base of Knife's Edge, go to sleep, get up at like 4:30 a.m.
Oh, yeah, and just haul it.
And then get up there.
Okay.
It'll be amazing.
Oh, that's perfect. I love that advice.
Yeah, all right,
Thank
cool.
You, man.
All right, take it easy.
Have a good one, huh?
Yeah, you too. Good luck. Okay, so we were talking about fires. Right, so Redding, the guy said that the fire coming over the hills looked like solar flares. That's how violent it was, which is crazy. So that was called the Car Fire. That's a new one. And I've been texting a little bit with Timber, and she told me about another new fire called the Wildcat Fire. And actually, I could probably just read you her texts. And that was north of Ashland. So they'd skipped 100 miles, Timber and Coins, to avoid the Klamath fire. And then they got up to Ashland and discovered that they had this other new fire called the Wildcat Fire that they had to skip 100 miles more of to get on the other side of it. All right, let me see. So Timber says Hendrix was the new fire. Blah, blah, blah. We skipped 100 miles because of the Hendrix fire. Oh, so I guess that's different than Klamath. So there's two new fires. She says, we skipped 100 miles because of the Hendrix fire. So much smoke, too much. I quit smoking, can't handle that. We are around mile, blah, blah, blah. Hendrix was a new fire. That Hendrix fire popped up and some people went through and had hot ash hitting them. We skipped and they caught up and told us it was nuts. So glad we skipped it for now. So they had hot ash raining down on them from the Hendrix fire, which is insane. So then she sent me a picture. They were at Crater Lake. She sent me a picture of Crater Lake, and it's just covered with smoke. So she says, we skipped up 100 miles to get out of the thick fire smoke at the California-Oregon border, but only to be in another fire area with smoke near Crater Lake. We will prevail. So that's crazy. And then my other friends, Four Eyes and River, got caught in a section where they had to hike out on a random forest road and were sort of rescued by some forest rangers in a pickup truck. And they sent some pictures of them, sort of like happily riding away in the back of a pickup truck with a couple guys who saved them. So fires, yeah. Is there any other fires out here? Where I am, there's a grass fire, maybe 50 miles northeast of where I was hiking yesterday, and we could hear the helicopters in there, I guess, dropping water on the grass fire, and apparently it's been pretty well contained. So this is scary and mostly in my rearview mirror, but it is like a factor up here too. And it's especially crazy when you camp in a place that's close to the road. Like I camped to this place called Mirror Lake last night, and it's a popular local place. So there's maybe 20 groups of people in there camping all around the lake. Very beautiful spot, but there was at least like 5 or 6 people who had fires, who had like campfires, and you're just looking at them like, you guys are just crazy. Like, what are you doing? And Bear, who I just talked to, who passed me earlier when while I was doing this podcast, said in the morning it just bothered him so much that he went around and dumped water on the fires that were still smoking. And he said he felt like a little bit of a jerk because people would see him and think like, what are you doing? My fire was out. But that's just, I guess, how nervous we all are about fires now. Yeah, so fires. And then, of course, the fire in Greece. So it's just a big global warming party with fires right now. So that's that. And then the last news, I guess, is just that this happened last time I hiked too, when I hiked the AT. While I'm away, these sort of like recruiters and job opportunities keep coming up, and I've got about 5 of them now, and they're all pretty good, and I didn't want to think about work or jobs or work at all again for a while. But the different jobs that have come in, one of them was in LA, one of them was in Vancouver, one of them was in Montreal, one of them was in New York, and now this one that just came in is a company that has offices in San Francisco and London, and it's a really good job. So that's kind of getting in my head, and I think it's sort of like the perfect antidote to being out here in the woods. It's just, you know, like the total opposite. Sitting at a desk in a cubicle in an air-conditioned environment with a computer and being able to just like wander out onto the street in London or San Francisco and get tacos whenever I want, or, you know, talk to other nerds about programming sitting around. So at the moment, it's very tempting to actually consider, you know, some of these offers, but they're all in far-flung cities and not Portsmouth. So that's another thing that's been I've been kind of struggling with and trying to figure out, what am I going to do when this is over? But I think the best thing to do is just focus on the now and enjoy the last 14 days. And yeah, I will end it there. Hope everybody's doing good. And Rafe out.